Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in John chapter 4 and a very interesting chapter. Um, Now, again, keep in mind the Apostle John is writing these events some 60 years after they happen. Okay? At the time that he's writing this, Jerusalem had been conquered and destroyed. At this time, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 years, okay? But the Jewish influence is certainly, of course, Jesus being Jewish, born Jewish, and now he traveled around. Jesus really never left Israel in his time, in his 33 years, other than at the time of his birth when they went to Egypt, okay, when they fled to Egypt. His purpose, again, to the lost sheep of Israel. Jesus would say that himself. Now, in this chapter, however, and you kind of have to kind of understand the history of why what we're going to get Jesus to have to go through Samaria. And one of the things about Samaria, kind of, like I said, to understand the history of what's going on, the attitudes. The Jews hated the Samaritans to the point there was even a slang, and I think we're going to see this later on, where the Pharisees will call Jesus a Samaritan. And that's kind of like using the N-word. That's how bad it was, using the N-word. Now, in order to understand the history of why the Jews hated the Samaritans, they loathed them. And Jesus, if you look at a map of Judea, if you were going from Judea to Galilee, and you take the kind of a straight route, you had to go through Samaria, the region of Samaria. All right, the Jews hated that. If it was possible, they would travel around because they hated that. All right, and if you don't think how people think about this, there are people today that will not go in certain areas of the city, metropolitan areas, and even to the point where it is designed travel-wise to not go into ghettos. Okay, so certain people don't want to go into ghettos. They're not just also. It's not because just crime. It's more so they don't want to be associated with it. There is a crime factor, but a lot of it is okay. We don't want to be associated, and that's the kind of the attitude that the Jews had towards the Samaritans. Now, the Samaritans, and you have to kind of go back into the Old Testament. When Solomon, when you had the nation formed by God, okay, when you had the nation of Israel that God formed. So you start off with one nation, and for when Moses brought them out of Egypt, so they wandered 40 years in the wilderness. And then about 450 years, you had the time of the judges. There was no king, but the judges. These judges they were both judges, and then they were also leaders, but not kings. And then you come to the time of the kings. Okay, now at this point, Israel is one nation. And the judges would travel around, as they say in the circuit sometimes, and to the 12 tribes, administer justice, things like that. And then you come to the kings, which in the Old Testament would be 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. And this lasted roughly 450 years, okay? So you had the first king, Saul. He turned out to be bad. And then God raised up David. And David doing was the pinnacle of government. His faults aside, David was a good king, and he was the best king. And under his leadership, Israel was the best at its time, prosperity wise, justice wise. So, and then from there it kind of goes down. Now, Solomon, who God put after David's time, even though he was a wise king, he kind of ruled, and he was very hard on taxes. And as his leadership goes towards the end of his life, he turned from the Lord and was kind of cruel. But more so, that it was the taxes. You know, we think about the temple and stuff that he built. He laid heavy taxes on the people. So when he died, and then his son Jeroboam came, the people came to him and says, "Hey, you know, your father was really rough in terms of the taxes. If you ease the burden, the people will serve you gladly. Serve you gladly." And, well, he said, "Okay, I'll tell you what." Now, he really, you know, this was his son. He said, "Okay, I'll tell you what. Y'all go away for 3 days, and I'm going to consult." He asked the elders, the people that have been around for his father, and they said, "You know, the people are right. They look, your father he was a good king, he was wise, but he laid it on them. The burden was heavy, the taxes and everything else. If you ease this, they will serve you gladly." He said, "All right, all right." Then he got his homies, people he going with his homies, and like fools, they said, "What? You should tell them, look, my little pinky finger is a lot worse than my father's whole hand. I'm gonna be worse, right?" He came out. And he came out and he spoke rough to the people. And they said at that time, they go, "You know what? What inheritance do we have in Jesse or David?" And from that time, the nation split. The nation split. All right, so the nation split. And that split was of God because of their wickedness. And at that point, from the time of Jeroboam, you had a divided nations. The southern kingdoms, which comprised of Judea and Benjamin, I think it was, and then you had the northern kingdoms, which were 10 tribes, northern. By the way, Galilee was in the north, okay? Now, and this is why when you read then Kings and Chronicles, you see he goes back and forth between both kings, the king of the north, the king of the south, Israel's king and Judah's kings. Well, both were wicked. Probably the northern kingdom was worse than the southern kingdom. And so then as time went on, this is when you get into the writings of the prophet, because the writings of the prophet are going to pick up about 250 years before Nebuchadnezzar. But the northern kingdoms fell because of their wickedness. The Assyrians conquered them, the northern kingdom. So again, if you look at a map of Israel, you would see that. I should have brought one up, but the northern kingdoms, you know, let me see if I can find one. And it's kind of help us to see what Jesus here. This is the one I'm looking at here. Um, I don't want the New Testament time. I want the Old Testament. Let's see if I can find one for the Old Testament. All right. Let's see. I don't know if y'all can see that one. Let me try one more here. I want to get a clearer one. Nope, nope, nope. All right. Let's go to... How about... Oh, I don't know if y'all can see that one there. All right, let me go down. All of this, I don't have a good map. Oh, was this a good one? That's the New Testament. Okay, I want an Old Testament map here. Oh, I'm wasting a lot of time here. All right, so let's look at this one here. All right, so I don't know if y'all can see that one. But this is the Old Testament kind of map, but the one on the right, and I wish I had a bigger picture here. I don't know if you all can see that, but the one on the right, okay, so this would have been kind of the kingdoms at the time. So you can't really see this, what I want to show. I'm going to get a better map, but if you look, no, this is not what I'm looking at here. Oh, I'm going to have to get a better map. All right, so if you look at this one here, so the northern kingdoms, and I want you to see the word Samaria, because that's the point I want you to see, Samaria. Okay, Samaria. Now, what happened at the time that when Israel fell, when they divided, Jerusalem became the southern kingdom. Jerusalem became the southern kingdom's capital, Jerusalem, and then Samaria, the city of Samaria, became the northern kingdom. Okay, the northern kingdom. All right, so when like I say, I don't think y'all can see that. Okay, you can probably see some of it here where it says Samaria, and then you see Judea, and then if you see where Jerusalem is, okay, then Bethlehem and all that. Okay, so Judea, and then up there where it says Samaria, what we're going to look at is Jesus would have had to travel from Judea, which is Jerusalem. He was kind of hanging around Jerusalem, and then as he makes his way up, he's going to go through the city of Jerusalem. And if you look up here, I don't know if y'all can't see my arrow, but you kind of look up towards the top, and you will see Sychar. This is where John 4 is going to take place. Now, what I wanted to kind of say is that the Samaria nation here, the Samaritan, okay, the reason why when the northern kingdom, when the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom, they laid it waste. Same thing with what happened a couple 180 years later with Babylon, but it laid it to waste. And then what happens is that the Assyrians started to populate the people with their own folks, different people. And then over time, the city of Samaria was ruined. However, the mixed multitude of people became known as Samaritans because these people would intermingle with Israelites, producing half-breeds. In other words, this is how the Pharisees saw they were half-breeds. Okay? And so after the Babylonian exile, right, a little over 100 years later, or 100, I don't know what, 140, something like that years later, remember during the time of Nehemiah, a remnant returned to Jerusalem and then somewhat built up Jerusalem. Now, if we move on in time, the Samaritans still occupied the region because the northern kingdoms were never restored in a sense as the northern kingdoms. In other words, there wasn't two nations. So now, during the time of Jesus, the attitude towards the Samaritans were, y'all not real Jews. So let's kind of pick it up, and I don't think we're going to finish with this today, but I kind of want to give you that brief history so you kind of understand the mindset of what is going on here. All right. So John chapter 4, verse 1 says, when Jesus knew that the Pharisees heard he was making and baptizing more disciples than John, though Jesus himself was not baptizing, but his disciples were, okay, he left Judea and went again to Galilee. He had to travel through Samaria, so he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar. So if you could make out what I was showing, that where that city is, okay, it says he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar near the property that Jacob had given his sons Joseph. Jacob Wells was there, and Jesus, warned from his journey, sat down at the well, and it was about 6 in the evening. So obviously somewhere around late spring and summer. Verse 7, and a woman of Samaria came to draw water, okay? Give me a drink, Jesus said to her, for his disciples had gone into town to buy food. She goes, how is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? She asked him, for the Jews do not associate with the Samaritans, and that's true. They hated them. And Jesus said, if you knew the gift of God and who it is saying to you, give me a drink, you would ask him, and he would give you living water. Now, so here you see the stories kind of setting up. This woman comes to Jesus and asks, now when she comes to draw a well. Now, some people speculate, and this is pure speculation here, that the woman coming this late in the evening could be she was a prostitute or an immoral woman, that she didn't, because as the story is told, that, the women usually would gather their water in the morning. And so her being treated as an outcast, she would come in the evening. Well, while that's possible, there's just no way for you to arrive at that from the story here. None. Absolutely none. She could have came because she got a late start. She overslept, whatever. Again, it's just no way to tell that. Jesus is going to address her issues. Okay? And one of the issues that he's not going to point out is that she was a woman of ill repute. Prostitute or just an immoral woman. That's not going to be addressed per se. But notice automatically she said she's defensive. Why? You're Jewish. You're Jewish. So why are you asking me? This was the climate with the Jews. This was the climate. And we automatically now see prejudice here. We can see how prejudice works. Stigma. How stigma works. That in both cases, they were in the same boat. That's the funny part, that neither one can say that was better than the other. The Jews thought they were better than Samaritans. And they treated them that way. They treated them like, we're better than you. Okay, I'm going to pick this up and kind of go through this next time. But I wanted to give I wanted you to kind of set up the story as to why the animosity. It's because when the northern kingdom was conquered, and the capital city Samaria fell, it then became a ruin. And so the mixed people, some of the foreigners who mixed with the Jews, and that's why they call them half Jews. But we're going to even see next time how their attitudes were too, how they were, okay, you Jews, whatever. But we're going to see that next time. But all right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. I'll see you in the next setting.